And before I talk about our next story, I want you to listen to something.
Last fiscal year, you exported 10 billion rupee electricity to India. How much you imported from India, my Nepalese friends? You imported 19 billion Nepalese rupees of electricity from India.
Now, this man is not a Chinese political leader. His name is Chen Song. He is the Chinese ambassador to Nepal. He is a diplomat. But diplomacy is clearly lost on him. Because when asked to deliver a speech to a Nepalese audience on the 2nd of September, Chen grabbed the opportunity and turned it into an India versus China contest. He began listing all that he thought was exemplary about China, its economy, for example, one which, by the way, is now collapsing. Obviously, he hid that part. Instead, he decided to glorify Chinese growth and make up lies about India. The Chinese ambassador to Nepal told the people of Nepal that it was their misfortune that India is their neighbor. You have to listen to this.
But fortunately, you had a neighbor like India, because India is a huge market, huge potential you can tap into. But at the same time, India's policy towards Nepal and other neighbors are not so friendly and not so beneficial to Nepal.
India is not a friendly neighbor? Really? Chen clearly has not looked into the mirror or revised his facts. And we will take the opportunity to remind him of some basic facts. China's 14 neighboring countries that the dragon shares a border with, all 8 of its maritime borders are disputed, by the way. China also has land disputes with almost all of its neighbors. Quite a friendly neighbor, isn't it? China has been involved in 23 territorial disputes since the year 1949. Also, numerous flare-ups. China claims 90% of the South China Sea. It has a dispute with the Philippines over the Scarborough Reef and the Spratly Islands. China is fighting Indonesia over the Natuna Islands. China is in a tussle with Malaysia over the Spratly Islands. China is fighting Japan over Senkaku Islands and Ryukyu Islands. China is provoking South Korea over the Socotra Rock. It lies within South Korea's EEZ, but China will not give up its claim on the rock. And then you have Singapore. China has managed to tick off Singapore with an increased PLA presence in the South China Sea. The tiny country Brunei, China is fighting it as well. Again, over the Spratly Islands. China is also engaged in a conflict with North Korea. It claims North Korea's Mount Baekdu and Mount Jiantao. And why stop at just 2 peaks when you can claim all of North Korea? There was a time China did that as well. Also, mind you, North Korea is not the only friend that China is going after. There is Russia as well. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls Russia's Vladimir Putin his best friend. But that has not come in the way of China claiming a large chunk of Russian land. China also claims large chunks of Bhutanese land. China's Communist Party believes essentially that large parts of Laos belong to China. Also remember, Beijing claims all of Tibet, all of Mongolia. It is a long list. And instead of reading it out to you, I'll just point you to China's recent map, which, by the way, also claims parts of Nepal as its own, as Chinese land. Just one of the many examples of how friendly China really is. But this ambassador insists that China is benevolent. He began his address by saying, and I'm quoting, "China, the growth, our future is bright, and we want to benefit all the developing countries." How exactly? By debt-trapping economies, seizing their land? This ambassador is living in alternate reality. one far from facts. He told his audience that when China opened up its economy, its people grew along with the country. How exactly, may I ask? Today, China is one of the world's most expensive places to raise a family. Couples are being forced to not have babies. So what growth is the ambassador really talking about? He claims when India opens the door, it quote-unquote does not bring economic growth to India. Just for the record, India's GDP growth in the last quarter was 7.8%. The Chinese, on the other hand, are out of jobs. That China has had to suspend its youth unemployment data. But the truth is too bitter to tell clearly. So what imaginary script is Chen reading after all? The ambassador said he had a script ready, but he was going to distribute it as handouts instead and use his time on stage to talk about lessons that Nepal can learn from China's development. Now, we can help there. Lesson number 1, betting on real estate may get you nowhere. Once the property bubble bursts, you will be left with ghost cities. Just have a look at China. Read up on Evergrande. Lesson number 2, using viruses as an economic tool is bound to boomerang. In the year 2020, China recorded its first negative GDP growth in 44 years. In the year 2022, China's GDP growth fell below the global average for the first time. India, on the other hand, remains a bright spot in this post-pandemic world. Lesson number 3. Regulatory crackdowns are never good for an economy. In 2022, Tencent and Alibaba recorded their first drop in revenue. Tencent's profit fell by 50%. Alibaba's net income fell by half. Lesson number 4. You cannot become an economic power by bullying smaller economies. Don't be a China that arm twists smaller countries and blackmails them to give up diplomatic ties with Taiwan in exchange for vaccines. Be an India that helps lesser developed countries through vaccine Maitri, a scheme that Nepal actually benefited from, by the way. So as the ambassador peddles propaganda, he should know that Nepal knows better. The people of Nepal can look through Chinese lies. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the updates on the move.